and welcome to Dreamleapers with Harriet Cole. You know, here on Dreamleapers, I love talking to people who have big dreams and who dare to make those dreams come true. And sometimes the people I interview are so creative that they dare to make that dream happen, and not everybody agrees with what it is. Their vision is so big that it challenges other people's vision. And that's who I have with me today, a good friend of mine who's been in the art game for her whole life. She is a groundbreaking artist. Her name is Renee Cox. She was born in Jamaica, just like my husband, reared in New York. And Renee, as an artist, has created work that challenges and confronts traditional ideas of gender, race, and beauty. And she embraces an aesthetic that celebrates Blackness as well as individuality. We know her as a photographer plus. Her photographs, installations, and performances have been exhibited around the world, including in major museums like the Whitney, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Smithsonian. She recently did a really cool cover shoot for the New York Times featuring Issa Rae and Salt and Pepper, in honor of Hip Hop 50. She's in San Francisco right now because she's featured in a film called The Sound She Saw. And she has an exhibition opening right now at Guild Hall in East Hampton called Renee Cox, A Proof of Being. We're going to talk to her about all of this and more. So please join me right now in welcoming my friend, Renee Cox.
Hello. How are
Hey,
you?
Renee.
Good,
Excellent.
good morning. I mean, it's morning for me, but I think it's getting into it's probably afternoon for you at this juncture.
It's all good. So you're in San Francisco.
I am indeed, yes.
And
Very bizarre
actually,
place.
we were talking just before coming on, and part of the whole point, Renee, of my platform, Dream Leapers, is to encourage people to reach for their dreams, to go for it, and it's also a reality check that not everybody can do it, is doing it, and you were in San Francisco for this incredible celebration of a film that you're a part of. But I'd just like you to give us a glimpse of what you just told us you saw, because San Francisco that I remember, and I've only not been there for a few years, is not what's going on right now. Like there's some disparities that are really apparent. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, pretty huge. When I arrived, like night before last, I mean, first of all, we came through, I think, what they call the Tenderloin, or it was that district. And what I saw literally was like zombies. I thought I was in like some sort of Hollywood movie where the world had ended and it was like the day of Walking Dead. I mean, there were hundreds of people in this park, all messed up, not healthy looking, far from it, and just congregated there. And then I got to the hotel and they told me, "You don't walk right when you leave the hotel, because no, it's like walk on the right. But if you go to the left, you're
Mm.
going to encounter all these people," which I did. I mean, there was one, I had to go to this deli, which was directly across the street, which actually here it's weird. Like the bodegas are called liquor stores. So I
Hmm.
was like, I went over there and there was this woman there, like with a sheet over her head and whatnot. I mean, she looked like a ghost. It was bizarre. It's very bizarre. And then last night was coming back with some of my colleagues from the museum, and we were in an Uber XL, and somebody launched a bottle at our car, hit the car, the bottle explodes, and we're like, oh my God. Because at first it sounds like a gunshot when it explodes. And then
Right.
there was like glass everywhere, and it was completely unprovoked. So it was just like you felt like you were in some bizarre film. It's nuts. I mean, they have a serious, serious homeless problem here. I mean, New York is paradise compared
Which
to
is
this.
frightening because, as we know, it's gotten worse in New York, especially since the pandemic. And
Mhm.
I was just talking to a gentleman who came into my building the other day who said, and outside of my building right now, there are all these people who are unhoused, living under scaffolding. It's really scary. And he said, it's not just what you're saying. It's nothing like what's happening in LA and San Francisco and warm weather places where people flock. So, God bless them. I hope that something changes to take care of them. But this is the world we live in, these extremities.
Right.
And, one of the things that I appreciate about your work is that you kind of play around the edges of extremities, not so much about this homeless situation, but about power
Yeah.
and the who has the power and wrestling power away from others, and really especially women claiming
Mhm.
our power when often the construct suggests otherwise. Um, can you talk about the evolution of your work, especially as it relates to female empowerment?
Okay, I mean, for me, it's always been about empowerment. I can relate this quick story, even back when I was a kid in junior high. I played basketball and I played basketball really well. And they didn't have a girls' team. So I wanted to be on the boys' team. So I got a bit of pushback. But I went to the newspapers and pled my case. And we all know at junior high, basically, we're physically still sort of the same, with the boys in terms of strength and stuff. And won my case and got to play on the boys' team. So this is as a kid. That's where I come from. So I've always had the idea that I could do whatever I wanted to do, um, and that if there was some opposition, that I would have to sort of lobby for myself and fight for that. And with the work, I noticed quite quickly. I mean, when I became an artist and when I started showing in 93, what I say is Black people, we have a really bad PR department. So, nobody follows. Like, I feel like you can say anything about Black people, right? And nobody's going to cancel
And
it.
do anything to
Yeah,
Black people.
exactly. And nobody cancels you, right? You're just like, oh, okay, fine, go right ahead. And at that juncture, the images and the stereotypes that were prevailing of us were rather negative.
Mhm.
And I was determined to overturn that and to create imagery that would empower and show off whatever our talents, our intelligence, and our humanity as people.
Mhm.
So that was my first sort of intervention, and I've stuck with that. That's always been my sort of path and my cause.
Well, I know you are from Jamaica, just like my husband, and
Mm,
there's something about your country. I mean, this is Jamaicans are generally, but the people I know, very strong, very clear, very attached to the ownership that comes from, I think, being from a country that is Black, being
mm.
from one of the first to be liberated. Um, and that sense of liberation and claiming liberation is something that I see in many Jamaican people. I'm curious about your upbringing, your family, like your roots from Jamaican culture, and what impact does that have on your work?
I mean, I think quite a bit. I mean, one of the first stories that my father tells is that when he came to the United States in the 1940s, his passage was booked and paid for from Jamaica. So we know, or we don't know, that Jamaica is an English colony. So he had a British passport. So this is before the time of computers and all of that sort of stuff and faxes. So when he arrived in Miami, he didn't know anything about Jim Crow or any of that stuff. So he was completely ignorant of this, sort of primitive way of handling things. He got picked up by a black cab driver and he told them that he was going to the Fontainebleau Hotel. The cab driver was like, "Oh, I don't know. What do you mean? You can't go there. That's a white hotel." My father basically, make a long story short, argued with him for about 15 minutes. Finally, he convinced him to take him to the Fontainebleau Hotel. He goes to the hotel. He walks through the front door because why? What other door would you walk
Right.
through? So he says that people were weird. The C's part. They're all looking at him. He goes to the front desk. the concierge is like, and he has to now have another conversation for about 15, 20 minutes with the concierge and explaining to him that this has been paid for and so on and so forth. And they're basically like, we didn't know you were black or whatever. Well, nobody asked that. And
Right.
you assumed that, with a British passport, and his name was Lancelot Cox, that he was.
Okay.
So basically, what they did is that stupid thing that they would do in South Africa. They made him honorary white, for his stay. So, so he could walk through the front door. He could go to the pool. They didn't have to drain the pool after he went into the pool.
Oh my
All
God.
of that.
So
So
he broke the mold upon arrival in the country.
exactly.
Wow.
But also I say this because of not knowing of the ignorance of the Jim Crow and whatnot, and in turn not having any fear about that either. So
Mhm.
he just went straight forward to where he was supposed to go because, like I said, it had been all paid in advance and it had all been arranged in advance. So I take a lot from that story where I start thinking to myself, there's a lot of things that become a state of mind that can be forced onto you.
That's
Yeah,
true.
and even generationally, it can be forced onto you. But I feel fortunate in the sense that I was sort of told this story, and it was like, no, wait, I can ignore this stuff or be ignorant to it and just carry on and do what I have to do. And then the other white supremacist, whatever people can have to fall into place. And for me, that was like a very empowering story right there.
It, there's
Yeah,
no question about it. And we definitely are impacted by the experiences that our parents have, and what a powerful experience that your father had. And you're right. Ignorance can work to our advantage sometimes. And
exactly.
there's a time, but he also had to be a strong man in order to be able to walk through that and then, challenge it and have it work. Because
Right.
you're right, they did drain pools when black people got into them, which is the most ridiculous thing ever, but it
Yeah. But he had a good sense of self, you know what I'm
happened.
saying? And even my great grandfather was like the first Jamaican to ever go to Harrow in England.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there was a there was a certain background of entitlement from Jamaica, even before arriving here. That
Did
he was going to be he demanded respect. He was going to be treated a certain way, and that was it. Yeah.
did your family grow up Catholic?
Yeah, they kind of forced that on me.
Well,
Uh,
I'm asking because why many people know you, even though it's been a long time now.
right.
The bad word at the time was Rudy Giuliani, right?
Yes,
Uh,
still is.
well, right, but that in the first iteration, and he
Right.
was the mayor of New York City, and so many awful things happened during that time. Uh, but the unintended consequence of how he reacted to your quintessential work, Your Mama's Last Supper, which I'd like for you to describe, but my setup will be to say, because of growing up Catholic and kind of challenging me as an observer of your work, you challenging the status quo of what the Catholic Church said should or shouldn't be, what is or isn't,
Mhm.
uh, shows up in
Yeah.
this piece of work and turned a whole bunch of Catholics upside down and around, including Rudy Giuliani, who shone a light on it. I think his idea was to knock you down, and it instead was the shot that rang around the world. Tell us about Your Mama's Last Supper, what it shows, and what your intention was.
Okay, so Your Mama's Last Supper is what I would call a revisionist look at Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. I did a semester abroad through Syracuse University as an undergraduate in Florence, studying art history. I was shown all of these images from the Renaissance and whatnot, and they're supposed to be the end all be all of high art. But what I noticed, I didn't see any black figures. And when I did see a black figure, it was a black Moor. Okay. And that was the extent of it. So I was like, wait a second, time for me to flip the script on this stuff. Because as we know, history is told by the victors or the people who are running the show. So I decided to insert myself into all of this imagery. My whole thing with Catholicism, it goes back to like fourth grade, really, where I thought, like, there's some really weird things here, right? Meaning that I was forced to do Holy Communion. And you put the wafer on your tongue, you can't chew it. That's supposed to be his body. And then you drink this nasty wine that's like, I mean, absolutely horrible. I don't know what vineyard it ever came from. And that's supposed to be his blood. And I said to them in fourth grade, like, wait, like, this is like cannibalism. Like, what are you people doing? Like, why am I eating the man's body and drinking his blood? And all at the same time, you're telling me you hate the pagans and you hate all of that stuff, but we're doing this cannibalistic thing. So for me, it begins there. I saw some discrepancies in this whole belief system. Also, they said to me, we were all created in the likeness of God. So when it came time for me to do the Last Supper, I decided that I should play the God figure. And why shouldn't the God figure be a woman and be a Black woman as I am? In the beginning, it was all about the goddess, right? Before the religions got into play. And remember, folks, the religions are man made. They took a little drop of spirituality and then manipulated the thing so that they can control people and instill fear in them, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to play the God figure. Then you might say, well, why are you nude? I'm nude because I was coming out of the fashion industry and I didn't want to have any accoutrement, any clothing on where you could say, oh, she's from this class or that, or you couldn't place it, right? For me, it was the purity of being nude. So they got upset about that, supposedly. And I showed the piece in 99 at the Venice Biennale in a decommissioned church, actually.
Whoa.
And which we can say is a stone's throw away from the Vatican. And all of the reviews was like, wow, this is beautiful, great piece, blah, blah, blah. Nothing negative. Then the piece comes to New York, to Brooklyn. And I'm not even thinking about it, but like the day before the show opens, I do get a phone call from, I think it was the Daily News or the Post, asking me about it. And I kind of just answered, their questions about it. And I didn't really think anything of it. Next thing I know, I was teaching at NYU. And the show that it was in at the Brooklyn Museum was, it comprised of 95 Black photographers, okay, male and female. So my class at NYU is a whole bunch of little white kids. So I was like, I felt a personal responsibility to take them to this show to see it on the press day. So I took them over. I got them through probably about 75% of the show, thank goodness. And then we got to where my piece was. And it was like sort of roped off with like, the velvet rope, like it was, I don't know, Studio 54
Right.
or whatever. Like somebody was going to go, no, you can come in. No, not you. Okay. And so I go in with my students and show them my work. And I like to do this little thing sometimes when I have work in museums. I'll go touch it. And then the guards come over and they're like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, no, it's mine. This is my work, my piece. I can do whatever I want with it. And simultaneously, at that moment, because this is the press day, I mean, all these people came out of the woodwork. It was like a Fellini film. And I have microphones in my face, and they're going, Mayor Giuliani says that you're, what was it, like un-Catholic, or Mayor Giuliani says that you're this.
Religious,
And it
right?
just went on and on and on. And I will admit, at that time in my life, I was a little bit in my egoic mind. So I just turned away from the cameras for a second, like this. And I was like, oh my God, Renee, this is the attention you've been waiting for all of your life. And so then I turned around and I was like, what did he say about me? I said, how dare he say that when he has his wife, Donna Hanover, on TV crying all over the place because he's cheating on her, which everybody in New York wanted to say, but nobody dare say it. I said it. And then it was like a firestorm, and then it just blew up and it kept going. It's like, Yo Mama, berates Rudy Giuliani as on the cover of the Daily News, the Post. It was crazy. And they all came after me. And the thing was with Giuliani, he never actually had any kind of, like, for all the news things that I did, he never showed up. He would send his divorce lawyer, right? Now his divorce lawyer was oh God, what's his name? I forget, but he was this guy who was like the divorce lawyer back at the time. He would wear cowboy hats and stuff like that, like a big personality. The irony there was, I guess they thought that I would be, that sort of mousy artist. I'm black, and I'd be like, oh, well, let me crunch up into a corner, and and
They
I'm not
picked the wrong
nervous.
one.
Yeah, and that was not the case, okay? Because the guy who's the divorce lawyer, I actually was friends with his niece, okay? Because we went to high school together. So I'm like, dude, like, I don't even understand why you're here. Like, you're not an artist, you're not a photographer. Why are we even talking? Because Rudy Giuliani doesn't want to be, sort of bothered with it. So he sends this guy along. But I was not afraid of the guy at all. I mean, like, I grew up in Scarsdale. So
And in the end, because I don't want to spend too much time on this particular thing, but what happened that was positive is that a lot more people very quickly learned about Renee Cox
yeah.
and got to see your work. And again, unintended consequence, I'm sure, on Giuliani's part, but people came to know you. There's something about that piece that has been a through line for much of your work. A, that you are featured in your artwork, and B, over the years, often featured nude. And, in all different incarnations of your body, having had children, your children being in pictures with you, uh, why is it important for you, the artist Renee Cox, to have you, the subject Renee Cox, in your work?
All right. I'm going to answer this. In grad school, they told me don't answer it like this, but this is the honest truth. First of all, I like me and I like working with me, and I'm always available for me. And I don't need to sign any releases to work with me either.
Hello.
So I'm like, why not use myself? And also, too, just as an example, because I think as a lot of times women in general, Black women, they don't necessarily like themselves. So it's like, it's also about sort of indirectly preaching, a self love, learn a self love, a self appreciation. And the other thing is, I was one of the first women at the Whitney Independent Study Program to be pregnant, and which I thought was rather bizarre in their 25-year existence. And people were like, oh my God, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? Your career is over. And I was like, what are you talking about? But then I come to find out that there's this huge discrimination. And so then again, I had to attack that, give them pregnancy photographs, yo mama, where I'm holding my 18-month-old son across my arms, like horizontally, where some people decided to run with the thing that I was holding him like an Uzi. But for anybody who's a mother, that's the quickest and fastest way to pick up your kid and move from point A to point B.
That's right.
And I was wearing stilettos too on top of it, because I believe a heel does give a body a nice line as opposed to some sort of sensible shoe. Yeah. And the other thing too is I was talking last night at this panel, and I said, you've got to you incorporate your children. You don't look at it like as some sort of hindrance. You know what I'm saying? So I would include them in the pieces and whatnot. And and that's an asset. I mean, it's like when you want a baby, what are you going to do? You're going to go to central casting, like, and like try to hire a baby. When you have a baby, if you have a baby, use that baby, use those kids.
It's
Yeah.
interesting you saying that you were one of the first ones to have a child, and how people reacted to that, to even to be pregnant, how they reacted to that. I remember, so as you know, I had my daughter late in life. I
Mm-hmm.
was in it was a crescendo moment in my career, and I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I'm pregnant." How am I going to
Mm,
be able to do all these things? Because my mother had chosen to retire after my younger sister was born, and I knew that wasn't for me.
right,
Because there's so many pressures, I think, on women to be a certain way and do a certain thing. It took me a minute to realize not only is this a blessing, but it can be great. And it has turned out to be the greatest thing ever. But
right.
I remember the feeling of panic, like, how am I going to be a good mother and an entrepreneur and a creative? And because our society, I think, has said you can't be all of those things.
Yeah, but that's a lie.
Yeah,
So
clearly. But there are a
that's a
whole lot of
lie. It's
lies,
another
right?
way of like trying to just suppress us, you know what I'm saying? And I didn't buy into that at all. So I was like, no, the kids come with me. I don't stop my life because I have kids. And I think it screws up women now, young women, because now they think, they can wait till they're 35 to have kids. And I'm like, you're
Maybe.
pushing it. You're pushing it. I mean, yeah, you can get lucky and whatnot, but that's not like the ideal time to start necessarily. You know what I'm saying?
True.
But yeah, I just rolled with it and used it and brought them along for the ride and, had fun with it. I don't believe in obstacles, really. I mean, because that's a choice when you believe in obstacles, and though they will set you back. So I believe it's like if there is an obstacle, I can kind of go through it or I'm going to go around it or whatever, but it's not going to block me.
As an artist, what is your discipline in your practice as an artist? Because you've been a working artist for decades,
Right.
and I mean, I know you started in fashion, but for a long time you've been primarily a working artist. How do you go about doing your work, and how do you stay inspired to keep doing it?
Just my life every day, whatever's happening around me. I started to stay in that present moment of how I react to things, how I want to sort of address things. I mean, it's all the time. I mean, I think being an artist, it's not like you a 9 to 5, where you punch in and you punch out. If you're an artist, it's your life. That's what you do. So you're always sort of, and you see like that too. Somebody like we were walking down the street yesterday and I'll see, oh wow, that sidewalk's painted and nobody else saw that. And they're like, oh wow, like, because I'm always looking around and whatnot. And I'm always looking for, something that interests me or something that catches my attention. So it's a 24-hour a day, it's not even a job. I mean, actually I consider it to be a huge privilege to be an artist and to be able to make, a living at it. It's like, but it also stems from the fact that you really need to believe in yourself and believe in what it is that you're doing. You really have to not have too much self doubt at all.
But every human being has moments of self-doubt. What do you do at those low points?
Well, I have to credit Eckhart Tolle,
Mhm.
living the liberated life and dealing with the pain body. And he explains very simply. Well, the first thing that touched me was he says, why are you waiting for the world to validate you? And I was like, oh my God, like an aha moment. Whoa, bricks were lifted off of my shoulders. And then he explains to you where the negative thinking is coming from. And he talks about the egoic mind and all the negative thoughts that come into everybody's mind and will continue to come into your mind. But the key is to be able to handle it and to be the witness to those thoughts. And if you can do that, and I say this, he says it like this: if you've suffered enough, you will understand this message. And what happens is every negative thought that comes into my head, I shoot it down and I curse it out, basically. And then it goes away. And then if another one comes in, I have to do exactly the same thing. But the beauty of this is if the more you do it, what happens, you end up with a open sort of space, a space of no thought, as the Buddhists call it.
Mhm.
And from that place, all creativity lies, as far as I'm concerned, because creativity comes from the heart, it comes from the soul, right? People in our society believe it comes from the brain, the mind. Wrong. That's why you see so much ugly art out there and ugly things, because it's coming through people's brains. The brain is merely a tool. You're not supposed to live in it 24 hours a day. You're supposed to use it, to market your stuff, do whatever you need to do, production, the execution of it, blah, blah, blah. And then you leave. Okay. Because we all know now, I think we can agree, it's not a healthy place to be. That's why you have people medicated and whatnot and all this other stuff, and they're going to see therapists and the whole bit. So, I mean, that's what I do in order to get rid of the negative thinking. Mind you, it will never go away. You will always have it. But the beautiful part is to know how to handle it when it comes in. When it rears its ugly little head, you go, oh, there, I see you. There it is. Okay.
Right.
Bleep, bleep,
No, no.
bleep out of my head.
Great point. In the pandemic, or as we were just coming out of the pandemic, it felt like one of the first public events that I attended was an art show that you had in Lower Manhattan. It was a rainy day. I didn't think anybody was going to go out. There was a beautiful show that you had downtown.
Right,
And
and Hannah Torre.
yes, and the work was really different. And
Mhm.
what I want you to describe it, but my perception, first of all, we're walking into this place. People really hadn't been getting together too much, and there was a crush of people, everybody coming who loved you and wanted to see your work. And it was sort of a breakthrough physically in terms of being together with people. And then
Mhm.
you walk into this space, and uh, a lot of the work had a mirror effect, a 3D uh, effect. Literally, it was
Hand cut.
right, hand cut, tiny pieces being put together to make these large, impactful images that really, even just looking at one would take you into another world. Can you describe this, because it's a series, what this series is, how it
Right.
came to you, and what it means?
Well, that series came about. It's called, first of all, it's called Soul Culture. I've always been sort of working around sort of the Afrofuturism.
Yep.
So it has its roots in there. And then I would say to you, it harkens back to what I just described to you with, sort of eradicating the negative thinking, second guessing oneself, and standing in one's own way. And once I really processed that and understood that with my whole body, not the mind, but my whole body, I started to do that work. And it started out as what I call flat pieces. And I was dealing with fractals and sacred geometry. I was influenced by Hindu art, psychedelic art, and I just started to create. And it was a beautiful thing. People ask me, like, do you have an algorithm for it? And I'm like, ew, that is such a gross question. Like, why would I have an algorithm? That would be horrible to know what it was going to be before you did it. Because the beauty of that work is each time you do a piece, it's a journey. I don't know where, I mean, I have the portrait that I start with, obviously, but I don't know where it's going to end up. And that part is fantastic. It brings you in contact with your inner child. I mean, I'll be there working with my assistant and we'll do something and I'll be like, oh my God, this is great. Damn. It's like you get excited. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's fun too. That's another key word that I think's missing from a lot of people's existence.
Well,
They
this
think fun is bad. And I'm going, no, fun is important. Fun is joy. And
sure.
why should Black people have fun and joy while they're doing something that they love?
I love
And
that.
then it evolved into me going into a 3D realm with it,
Yes.
where I was hand cutting the pieces and then, building on these images and whatnot. And that's super exciting too. And then it goes even further than that now, like at the show at Guild Hall. I have a 12-foot by 12-foot room where I'm going to be doing projection mapping. So a lot of that, some of that imagery from soul culture will be covering the floor, the ceiling, and 3 of the walls. So it'll be like a total immersion of black bodies going around you and whatnot, with original music too. So,
Music that you created,
no, 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 not me, not me.
but
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
uh,
that I
had
commissioned. Yeah.
commission. Yeah.
So,
So
but
let me ask you
it's
this.
just super
Let me tell you
exciting.
this sense of math and art, because you say people ask you about the algorithm. When people talk about algorithms now a lot, but this sense of the mathematics of the work, and when everybody sees it, you'll see there is something quite mathematical and symmetrical about it.
Mhm.
So I understand why people might ask that question. Um, I
But it's a question that's so like, ugh, do you know
Yeah,
what I'm
I hear
saying?
you. I hear you. But
Yeah, I mean, math is important, don't get me wrong,
right,
especially higher mathematics. I mean, that's
yeah,
philosophy. That's we're
exactly.
not talking about arithmetic here. We're
Right.
talking about like high math is like fascinating.
Well, and
Yeah.
you see that. I mean, when I look at that work, soul culture, it I see the symmetry,
Mhm.
the there's a level of detail in the reflectiveness of it too that is astounding. I mean, the fact
Mhm.
that you did that, and the fact that you did a lot of it is very small. You know, building out
Mhm.
it. I mean, in some ways, it defies understanding, which I guess that's how art can be. But I wonder about the math and the artists and how, as you say, higher math. How does how does that play into your thinking, or does it? Is it a
It
conscious thought?
doesn't. It doesn't. Because if it did, I think there would be a blockage.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? If I sat there and thought about that, I don't think I could create from that place. So I don't
It
think
just
about
is.
that.
It just is.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Michael Jackson said at one point. You know, he goes like the music it just comes through me and then I just put it out there. And I feel a similar way. You know what I'm saying? Because if you had to, and again, there's the blockage is that if you had to sit there and think about that or do some sort of calculations and stuff, no way. I wouldn't. I don't. I think I wouldn't do it. It just has. It just comes through me, and I like the journey. The journey is the great part because you don't know where you're going to end up. You know, sometimes you start the piece and you don't know where the end is. You know, there's just a point where you go, okay, maybe we can end it here. Or my assistant will say, this is the end. Because you could just keep going and going
Right.
and going. Yeah.
So
So, I mean,
Guildhall show. This is a big show, opening now in East Hampton, and what will we see? You told us about that room. What what
what you're
what?
going to see, okay, what you're
Yeah.
going to see is sort of like a survey. For lack of a better description, I would say to you, you know, some of my greatest hits.
Hmm.
So it's pieces from different bodies of work over time. And it's like I would say an overall view
Hmm.
without the sort of details, because when I do a body of work, it usually consists anywhere from 12 pieces to like say maybe 25, 30 pieces.
Right.
So it's going to be like a little sampling, I guess you would say, of work. And in my mind, I call this part one because I've been working for 30 years. So I'm like, this is part one at Guildhall. Part two, I have a show coming up at Princeton University Museum in November. In my mind, that might be part two. You see what I'm
Okay.
saying? It won't be called that, but that's
Right.
kind of the way I look at it. Yeah.
So let's talk for a moment about just being in that space. In Guildhall is in East Hampton. This is, you know, I call that area my happy place. I love being
Mm,
at the beach. I love being in the community, being in this dynamic community of people when the sun is kissing you. There's nothing better for me. Um,
mhm.
you're from a place like that, from Jamaica, but what does it mean for you to spend time in this community? What does it do for your spirit?
It just, you know, it's nature.
Hmm.
So just nature itself opens you up. And that's just a healthy place to be. I always need to be close to an ocean. At one point, I made a valiant attempt to surf and whatnot for years. Although I believe it's not maybe necessarily a great idea to start surfing when you're 50, you know, you need to start like when you're a kid. I'd have little kids telling me, okay, this is a good time to go out, because here's a rip. So just the rip's going to take you, and I'm like, oh, thank you, honey. Thank you so much, because they've been surfing since they were like 2. But I made an attempt and I still love it. You know what I'm saying? I still like getting out beyond the break. And, no, I'm not the first one to go try to take a wave or anything. I'll have my Zen moment out there. And then eventually I'll take a wave and see what happens. And that's a commitment because there's no turning back. It's not like skiing where you can pull off to the side and regroup. Like once you go with that wave, either you're going to take it and, stand up, or you're just going to be like in a washing machine and whatnot. And there's something kind of hostile but rewarding. I always thank the ocean after one of these sort of sessions that it didn't kill me. And I'm very humble about it. And I think that's what the area does for me. It's about nature. It's about, seriously communing with the ocean, because that's a whole other different relationship when you surf. And it goes back. I mean, I actually went to boarding school out there when I was like 12 years old. My parents had me at a boarding school in North Haven.
Wow.
So I've been familiar with the area for a long time.
That's great. One of the things that I know that you do, and I'm thinking of it in relation to your respect for Eckhart Tolle, you ride your bike for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. And I mean, obviously there's the fitness component, but I'm going to assume that that's also a peaceful experience for you. Can you talk about just fitness in general? Because I know that's a big part of your life, and what it means and what you do.
I mean, I'll cycle about 100 miles a week. For like, diehard cyclists, like that's nothing. But for me, that's something. And what it does is like with any sport, it takes you out of your immediate, headspace, right?
Right.
So it's like it brings a certain clarity and whatnot because you're just focused on what you're doing. And it eradicates any extraneous, thoughts you may have. And fitness has always been something that I've been since I was super young. I've always played a sport of some sort. I mean, at one point I moved to suburbia in Chappaqua and I played tennis like a fiend, because I thought I was going to play Serena someday. So
didn't happen.
That didn't happen, but but it was like, it was good while my knees lasted. Let's say that. Then I needed to replace them, but now they're okay. They're all brand new. So I'm
That
able to
seems to be
cycle it.
like that didn't happen when we were growing up, but now suddenly, I guess maybe instead of knee replacements, it was wheelchairs and canes because
Exactly, you were crippled. Period.
Yeah, because
you were bone on bone, you were bow-legged, or you were knock-kneed, and that was it. That was the end of the story. You weren't getting around too much. And the other thing with fitness for me, this is a little bit on the superficial side, but having been a fashion person, still enjoy fashion a lot. I always wanted to make sure that I could still be sample size. So,
you're doing a good job.
Yeah, so that I could wear designer clothes and, there was, no issues. You know what I'm saying? It'd be like, I don't need to have it altered or anything like that. And I can borrow stuff from designers very easily too. And that, it sounds frivolous, but that's been important to me.
Sure.
Yeah. And also health too.
Absolutely.
I mean, contrary to what, I think what people are being told in the Black community. Yeah, I mean, I believe there should be love of body, but at the same time, being 300 pounds is just not healthy. Sorry.
It's interesting. I just talked to a friend who's right now weathering a major health concern. And
Mm,
just yesterday, she said to me, I think part of the problem that people are dealing with, especially Black women, is with this inclusivity movement, which
right.
is fine,
Hmm.
love yourself how you are. But with it, we've gotten to the point of not checking people when they're unhealthy. People who love each other, not saying, hey, wait a minute, you really should do something or something else may happen. Your work is so focused on Black women, and I'm curious about how you see Black women today and what your hopes are for us moving forward.
Speaking to the point that you just made about our health and our weight and stuff like that, for me, I feel like it's like just another form of genocide to get
Mm,
rid of us. To tell us that, it's okay, have all the bone tone chips you want. And I feel like there's a bit of a disservice there. And I hope that Black women um, sort of, wake up. I'm not saying people have to be a size, 6, but I'm saying, but when it pushes over into like the extreme, that I believe they need to do something about it and to be aware of that because I mean, the health risks are just incredible. Even myself, I mean, I can admit at my age now, my mother had diabetes, my uncle had it, my grandmother had it, never met her. She was already dead by that time. And now I just got a diagnosis of pre diabetes, which I'm not surprised at because, as I just explained, it's like all in my family.
there,
But
yeah.
as soon as they said that, I was like, mm-mm, no more wine for me, girl. You will not see me drinking any wine because it's sugary. No beer. I just eradicated all of that stuff immediately and have basically for the last 3, 4 months been like on a sort of high protein diet, like really watching my carbohydrates and stuff because I know what that looks like and
Yeah.
I don't want it to become diabetes.
Mhm.
So if I'm like scratching at the door, okay, I know what to do about it.
Well,
And
and you know what?
it
I'm so
requires discipline.
I'm so glad you're saying it publicly, Renee, because
Mhm,
public figures people often look at as perfect, and
mhm,
you're living a life I could never live, which I don't think is true. But when you tell the truth about what you're facing and what you're doing about it, I think it can inspire other people to make smarter choices.
right. Yeah,
And
no, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the great privileges of being sort of known for something that you do.
yes,
I have a saying, I'll lie for you, but I ain't gonna lie to you.
love that.
You know
Tell
what I'm saying?
us,
Because it's
tell
like,
tell us about the film that you're featured in before we go. We just have a couple minutes.
okay, well, the film is called The Sound She Saw, which is the title is taken from a Ray DeCarava book. And it's done by Crystal Welly. And it's a feature length film. And I think we're about like eight or nine female Black photographers, and we're just talking about like our practice and whatnot, and it shows our work and stuff. And it's highly informative. I mean, even for me, because I mean, some of the people like I didn't know of and whatnot. So I mean, it's a really good film.
And when will it be available?
That's the one thing I don't know.
Sure. Well,
She's been showing it in festivals and whatnot, and like at the museum and stuff. I don't believe it has a distributor at this point,
mhm.
but I mean, obviously that's what she's working
Yeah,
towards.
of
So
course. And your show at Guildhall, what's the name of it?
it's called A Proof of Being.
A Proof of Being. Renee Cox, A Proof
That's
of
right.
Being. Yeah,
Hmm.
the whole thing is Renee Cox, colon, A Proof of Being, and it's from, July 1st through is it June 2nd?
Yeah, it opens to the public July 2nd through I think September 2nd.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So it's up all summer long,
that's
and I hope people come out and see it because I don't think there's been too many Black people who have had like the one woman show at Guildhall.
I don't know of that. This could be a first. It's certainly, if it's
Yeah,
not the first, it's one of. And so,
exactly.
congratulations on the show. Can't wait to see it. And thank you for talking to us about your life and career. Thank you.
Mhm. And just on parting, I would just say to people, like, just do you and stop second guessing yourselves.
Love that. I
Yeah,
mean, that's a drop the mic moment right there.
exactly.
I love it. Thank you, Renee Cox, and thank you to all of you for tuning in to Dream Leapers with Harriet Cole. Renee told you, just do you. That's it. Can you do that? And while you're doing it, leap. Take the leap into your dreams because it is worth it. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.